Okay, members, we have a quorum, so I'll call the meeting into order. We're now in public session. No apologies have been received, so members, I propose we go into private session to deal with some housekeeping matters. Is that agreed? Thank you. At the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting their mobile phones are turned off completely or switched to airplane safe or flight mode depending on their device. Not sufficient, just put your phones in silent mode, as this will maintain a level of interference in the broadcasting systems. Item number 1 on the agenda is consideration of revised estimates for public services 2019 for vote 16, the Evaluation Office, and vote 23, the Property Registration Authority, and consideration of 2019 further revised estimates for public services. Vote 34, Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, Minister Eoin Murphy. The Dáil has ordered on the 20th of February 2019 that the following revised estimates be referred to this committee for consideration. Vote 16, the Valuation Office, and vote 23, the Property Registration Authority, and further revised estimates 34, Housing, Planning and Local Government. I would like to welcome to the meeting this morning Mr Eoin Murphy, TD, Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, Ministers of State Damien English and John Paul Phelan, and the Department officials to the meeting this morning. The purpose of today's meeting is to consider the revised estimates and the further revised estimates. As we agreed in private session, we will begin with vote 34 and then move to vote 16 and vote 23. For vote 34, I will call the programme and invite questions under that programme. Members will be called in order which they indicate. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I would now like to call on Minister Murphy to make his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. And I welcome the opportunity to discuss with the committee this morning my department's estimate for 2019, as well as the votes for the Valuation Office and the Property Registration Authority, which are also under the aegis of my department. I'm accompanied by Ministers of State Damien English and John Paul Phelan, who will deal with their delegated areas of responsibility. To assist the committee, we have provided a briefing on the department's funding for 2019, as well as other key performance information. Turning first to vote 34, the estimate before the committee sets out my department's budget for this year. Gross expenditure of almost €4 billion is budgeted for my department. This represents an increase of over €600 million, or 18% on the provision in 2018. The gross provision for 2019 is made up of €1.874 billion in current spending and €2.124 billion on the capital side. In addition, my department's programmes will benefit in 2019 from resources of some €646 million that will be available from the local government fund. I'll turn first to the largest single programme, which is housing. This year, in the interest of presenting information in a more user-friendly format, we've expanded the number of subheads from 10 in previous years to 25 in 2019. With the growth in the range of housing measures in the context of rebuilding Ireland, it was getting increasingly difficult for people to see on the face of the estimate the specific provisions that were of interest to them. So this year, we have more than doubled the number of housing subheads in the estimate to cover as far as possible the full range of programmes, and we've provided the comparable data for 2018. Turning to the actual financial provisions, over €2.3 billion is being made available in the vote for housing programmes this year, an increase of over €350 million on the 2018 estimate. In addition, local authorities will fund a range of housing services to the value of €93 million from local property tax receipts that exceed their LPT funding baseline, bringing the total housing provision to almost €2.4 billion. This investment will see the housing needs of almost 27,400 households being met this year. And of these households and housing supports, 10,000 will be new social housing homes delivered through build, acquisition and long-term leasing programmes. The remaining supports will be delivered through HAP and RAS schemes. A critical focus of 2019 activity is on the prevention of and the delivery of services for homelessness. And an allocation of €146 million, which is up €30 million on 2018, will address the increased demand for emergency homeless services and also assist in supporting homeless households with long-term and sustainable housing solutions. In 2019, it is envisaged that in excess of 5,000 adults will exit from homelessness into sustainable tenancies through the provision of social housing homes and HAP. Housing First will continue to be rolled out, targeted at rough sleepers, and funding will also be provided to support the further rollout of the Family Hub programme. Other important housing supports and services that will be funded through the increased resources in the estimate in 2019 include €13 million in capital funding to support a range of traveller-specific accommodation schemes, and this is up €1 million on last year. €23 million to support the continuation of the mortgage to rent schemes and to allow for some 560 households to be supported under the schemes, and that's up €1 million from last year as well. And almost €72 million, which is up €11 million on last year, towards supporting the National Regeneration Programme, targeting some of the country's most disadvantaged communities. €25 million will improve up to 3,000 social housing homes through the Energy Efficiency Programme, and €57 million, which is up €4 million on last year, will be provided for home adaptations to be undertaken, facilitating people with disabilities and older people to continue to live in their own homes. €32 million, which is up €2 million on last year, is being provided to fund the remediation of a further 460 houses affected by pyrite. And €10 million, which is up €2.8 million on last year, is being provided to meet the operational costs of the housing agency and support the agency in its expanded role in the delivery of housing services and supports. And finally, €12.5 million, which is up €4.6 million on last year, will support the expanded role and functions of the Residential Tenancies Board, or RTB, and also to accelerate the rental inspections programme by local authorities. Budget 2019 provided for a trebling of the Service Sites Fund to €310 million over the period to 2021, meaning that the minimum number of Service Sites Fund homes that will be facilitated over the lifetime of the fund will be over 6,000. The 2019 contribution to this amounts to €89 million. The Local Infrastructure Housing Activation Fund, or LIHAF, will be supported by an allocation of €41 million in 2019. This will go towards 30 key public infrastructure projects, such as roads and bridges, which will unlock land for housing development which would otherwise remain stagnant. Turning to water services, as the committee is aware, the costs of normal domestic water services provided by Irish Water now fall to be met by the Exchequer from the vote of the department, rather than by a combination of current funding from the local government fund and capital contribution from the Minister for Finance, as was previously the case. In 2019, over €1.2 billion, €562 million on the current side and €646 million on the capital side, is included in Programme B of the estimate for meeting Irish water costs in respect of domestic water services and providing a capital contribution towards investment. This includes an increase of €146 million for vital accelerated capital investment in water and wastewater services, as planned for under Project Ireland 2040. The group water sector continues to be an important element of the water industry in Ireland, and reflecting this, a provision of €23 million is made in 2019 for capital spend under the Rural Water Programme, through which funding is provided for group water schemes, which is an increase of €3 million on the 2018 estimate. Chair, following changes in recent years, principally involving motor tax receipts now going directly to the Exchequer and Irish Water being funded directly to the Department's vote, the Local Government Fund has returned more fully to its original purpose of funding local authorities, and without the circular flows of funds that had built up over the years. So in 2019, income sources into the fund are estimated to be local property tax of €470 million and a payment from the vote of €185 million. The latter is an increase of €60 million on 2018. My department will make payments estimated at €646 million from the fund in 2019, primarily LPT payments to local authorities of €503 million. Finally, in the local government area, capital investment in fire and emergency services this year will amount to €11.2 million, which is an increase of nearly €2 million on the 2018 estimate, and this will allow greater progress on our programme for the construction and/or upgrading of fire stations, the procurement of fire appliances and other essential specialised equipment, and the provision of enhanced communication facilities. In the planning area, €58 million in capital funding has been provided as the initial tranche of the new €2 billion Urban Regeneration and Development Fund, which has been established under Project Ireland 2040 and is aimed at transforming our cities and towns and helping achieve sustainable growth in these areas. The €58 million URDF provision takes account of the fact that among the measures the Government have identified to help meet the increased costs in 2019 of the National Children's Hospital is an updated profiling of expenditure under the fund, which indicated that €13 million of drawdown could be reprofiled from 2019 to 2020 without causing delays to projects. Also in the planning area, over €20 million has been allocated to resource the start-up of the Land Development Agency this year, and €2.4 million provided to meet operating costs of the new Office of the Planning Regulator. Further areas of expenditure set out in the 2019 estimate include meeting the capital and current costs of Onboard Planola at €18.5 million and Met Éireann at €30.4 million. Chair, as the committee is aware, in 2017 the Government decided to assign to my department responsibility for Ordnance Survey Ireland, the Valuation Office and the Property Registration Authority. Provision of €15.8 million was made in vote 34 for Ordnance Survey Ireland, while the other two organisations have separate votes, amounting to €14 million for the Valuation Office and €31 million for the Property Registration Authority. These bodies are to merge to form Táilte Éireann, and work is proceeding in my department on this important project. Chair and members, I've kept my remarks as brief as possible and focused on some, but by no means all of the spending areas, in order to allow for a full discussion on the programme and funding of my department and related organisations this year, and I'm happy, along with the Ministers of State, to deal with matters that members wish to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And we'll take questions under the first programme A, which is housing. Deputy O'Brien.
Thanks very much for the responses. Just a couple of quick questions. Maybe in plain English you can tell us what the 13 million reprofiling means, because it's not clear from the document in terms of what areas are being cut from and what will be delayed until the following year as a result of it. Just a couple of other quick questions under the same heading. Obviously I welcome the additional funding in terms of pyrite. I just note that there doesn't seem to be any additional funding made provision for pyrite and mica in terms of Donegal and Mayo. Now I know Cabinet approved a scheme in principle and you're working on the details of it. is the absence of anything in the estimates for that an indication that the scheme won't be available for people to access finance until next year, or could that change during the course of the year? Traveller accommodation. I suppose my question here is, you had almost a 50% underspend last year, so 5 point whatever million wasn't spent. It was the same the year before. What happens to that money? So specifically, for example, the 5 point whatever million that wasn't spent on travel accommodation, was that spent on something else last year, or is that just rolled into the overall allocation for travel accommodation this year? In terms of the Residential Tenancies Board, the increased funding there, what is that going to fund? Because obviously we're very supportive of the new regulations you're proposing to introduce. We know from talking to Rosalind and her staff that there's going to be a significant extra administrative burden. So can you maybe say what that 10 million translate to? And then finally, can you maybe point to where in this part of the estimates additional resourcing for local authority staff and housing and planning departments is? Because obviously we've had some reports, and I've no idea how accurate they are in the media recently, of the amount of money, for example, Dublin City Council may need to ensure proper enforcement of the new short-term letting regulations. So is that extra money in the local government fund, or where is the provision made? And maybe if you can talk a little bit in detail about what extra Dublin City is getting, because they're really going to have the biggest administrative burden for the short-term lettings. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. Just take this final note. Sorry, I'll ask Damien to come back to you, Deputy, in relation to traveller accommodation. Sorry, Minister of State English. I beg your pardon.
Sorry, we call him Damien.
No,
So is he,
a degree of formality is important in these matters. So in relation to your first question on the 13 million reprofiling from the Urban Regeneration and Development Fund, you'll recall that we made the first allocations under the fund last year, and we approved applications worth €100 million under the first tranche of the 2 billion. And there was two streams, streams A and B. A were projects that were basically shovel-ready and ready to go on site, and B funding, which you would have seen in the applications, were smaller parcels of money because they were allowing people to do, say, design projects or put together the cases for what would then become a funding for a project in their town. We provided 100 million, or I suppose we approved 100 million. So 100 million worth of funding was successfully approved. But when we looked at the numbers of what might actually be drawn down, working with the local authorities, so there's a team in the department administering the fund. They've been engaging with each local authority that was successful under A and B funding to actually then see, well, how do we get this off the ground and what needs to be done next with some of the B team, well, the B stream. A little bit more explanation was needed, and there was also those C projects that weren't successful for A or B. So in the course of that engagement, they became aware that while 100 was approved, it wasn't all going to be drawn down. And we think actually that about €58 million will be drawn down in the course of 2019. And that allows for €13 million to be allocated to the costs in relation to the Children's Hospital. And so in allocating that money this year, because it won't be drawn down, so it's not going to delay any projects, an additional €13 million will come in next year to make sure that the fund has all of the money that was committed to the fund.
And it was the expectation prior to the so-called reprofiling, was the expectation that those projects in the B and the C stream would have happened. It's just they were going to take longer than the projects in the A stream.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's no delay for any of the projects from a funding point of view, I suppose, to say. But it is true to say that, not unlike LIHAF, approval is given in year one, but the money isn't necessarily drawn out until year two, or at least a significant amount of it might not be until the actual work commences. And with some of the A projects, because they're quite substantial, they will need to do more on the kind of preparation side than might have been envisaged. And with some of the B projects, like some of the B projects were potential A's that we thought with just a little bit more work could really be great. So they won't necessarily draw down funding. So no delays to any projects.
Okay.
And the money reprofile comes back to us next year. So that 100 million is solid. And while we're discussing it, I know it's underestimates, but we'll probably get back into it in Rebuilding Ireland review a little later. My intention is to open another round of funding as soon as we've engaged every local authority that's successful in the first round of funding. So that's when we'll announce more money. So this 2 billion is solid there. In relation to MICA, so and like just to say, I have met people who are affected by this in Donegal and Mayo. They have been marching the long yards. They have been incredibly patient with the government, and they're in very difficult circumstances. Thanks to the work of colleagues across the House. But I suppose, you know, Joe McHugh and Michelle Mulhern, because I work with them more closely than others, and the work that they have done with Minister of State English, at the budget, I was able to agree with the Cabinet and with the Minister for Public Expenditure Reform that there would be a scheme, that scheme would open this year. And we are very, very close to finalising what that scheme would be. So, and I say close, I mean weeks. There had been a couple of delays previously, which meant that the memo couldn't get on the Cabinet agenda, and then a few more ideas came to the table. So money has been notionally allocated, if you like. So money will be made available this year. That is, I mean, that's something that we've said before. What I will have to do with officials is to see where we can make it available from. But we believe from an initial estimate that we can make money available, and we will. What we're trying to finalise at the moment with the department is the details of the scheme, how it's applied, who gets access, etc., and then what the liability will be beyond 2019 in terms of the potential money available each year after this.
And I presume if I ask you to give me an indication of what the amount of money this year could be, you're not going to answer that until you announce the scheme, but if you're in a position to give us some information about that, it'd be useful. But more importantly, I suppose, can you just confirm that it will include both the mica block houses affected in Donegal and the pyrite houses affected in Mayo? Because that's my understanding, so just so there's no ambiguity there.
I mean, Deputy, I can answer any question you ask me. Whether you like the answer is a different question. No, I'm afraid, just to protect the integrity of the process, I can't talk about numbers, sure. But I can confirm about Donegal and Mayo, as per your question. Right. So, but I mean, I like, people have done a lot of good work on this, sure. So we want to get it done.
No,
we're going
to get it done
soon. In relation to the RTB, we've all had engagements with the RTB, and I think they're just doing a fantastic job in a very difficult environment at the moment, given what's happening, both for renters, but also for landlords as well. And one of the first things that I wanted to do on foot of meeting the RTB when I came into this job was to help put in place a change management programme for the organisation to make sure that they could have the powers and the funding to become an independent, if you like, regulator for the sector, to be a robust defender of the rights of both sides of the equation. And that's where we're going. So the increased money, what we intend that to support in 2019, there'll be, I think it's the 7 million is the non-pay. And it reflects both the expansion of the core functions of the RTB, as we've already outlined them, continued support for the rent pressure zones and changes that are coming there, the additional powers and functions that have been rolled out over the rent bill that we've been discussing recently and will be in committee stage very soon, so that they have the resources for the new powers that are coming to them. And then also, obviously, of course, they're going to be able to investigate or initiate complaints themselves and investigate them as well. And we're moving towards annual registration of tenancies as well. And they continue to develop a new IT system that's going to help for getting better, more granular data on what's happening in our rental sector, but also as we move towards rent register, rent transparency, being able to do that. So the extra money is going to go into those different strands that we've been developing over the course of 2018. And then in relation to... So one of the things that we said to the local authorities since I think the first housing summit was if they wanted to have additional staff, hired for housing functions, that we would provide that funding. And I suppose the short answer to your question is it's provided through a number of different streams. So if I remember correctly, each of the vacant housing officers in each of the 31 local authorities is about €50,000, and that's provided, I think, through that subhead in relation to vacancy. It's not provided separately through a different stream. And in relation to the funding allocation for short-term letting in Dublin City Council, officials are continuing their engagement in terms of the resource requirements that are needed there. I suppose they have an idea of how they want to approach it. I have an idea of how I want to approach it. Both would have different demands depending. But the money isn't so much that we wouldn't be able to, if we needed an extra, repurpose it from somewhere else. We're not talking about 13 million like we were for the URDF for that kind of thing. So that won't be, funding won't be an obstacle to resources as far as I'm concerned. And then, sorry, Minister State English is going to answer on the traveller accommodation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I suppose the short answer is the money is absorbed into the overall housing budget, but naturally if more projects, with the expert panel due to report hopefully in April, I think they're on track to do that, and the work that's happening with this committee and others around, we're hoping to increase the spend on the capital spend on travel specific accommodation, so we can do that. But to be very clear, when we do fund general housing accommodation, that's available to traveller families as well, so it's not where we'd like it to be spent directly, but it's still getting spent on housing. And if you look at the increased expenditure on the current spend, it's from 4.7 up to 5.3. That's increased spend generally with social workers who are working with traveller families to help them access accommodation. It's very often non-Pacific travel accommodation, so you can see an increased activity there. So it's getting absorbed in housing, but naturally, I think the desire in all of us here, And I recognise that is how we increase the spend on capital projects, which hopefully should happen from this year on.
And just one quick supplementary on that. One of the concerns I suppose some of us have, and it's not a criticism of the department, but in how the capital fund for travel accommodation is spent, too little of it has been spent on new units for new households, and too much of it has been spent for refurbishments. Now, I'm not against the refurbishments, but unlike, say, standard social housing, where we have a budget for capital for new units to build or buy, and we have a refurb budget, that's less clear in the travel accommodation. Is it possible to give us a breakdown at a later stage, between what goes into refurb versus what goes into new units, or how many new units are provided? Because I think that would be useful.
We can do that. That generally is provided. I can send you on all the details in that. But again, our spend will reflect the requests from local authorities and what comes through their TAP programmes. And I think you'll appreciate that the new TAPs won't start until the new councils take up in their position. So in September 19, you'll see a new round of TAPs for a 5-year plan. And that will set out and their ambitions there. But it will be important that we try to make sure we deliver on those TAP programmes. And it is fair to say a lot of the effort is concentrated on refurbishment, because that's essential works too. Sure. In recent, what happened in the last couple of years, it's important that we do refurbish. But I think we need to also increase the provision, and we're focused on that. And that's why, responding to the sector, we set up that expert panel, which should put us all in a stronger position to deliver more additional accommodation.
Thanks.
Pat?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe I'll start with just in relation to the traveller accommodation, and welcome the increase. And I suppose we go back to the original problem being before us before, Minister, in relation to the lack of local authority spending that money. And maybe the question I'm trying to ask you is where we are in relation to that whole review process, and where do you see it moving forward within the next year? And are we looking at significant changes to who takes responsibility for the spending of that money, seeing as the local authorities don't seem to be able to spend it? Just in relation to the reprofiling of the 13 million, and I know, Minister, you're saying clearly the Urban Renewal Fund will stay at what it was originally intended. There won't be any change in it. You're just moving the 13 million from this year to next year. And like, the 13 million has to be found somewhere at some stage. Do you know what I mean? So, okay, it's been used this year from a cash flow point of view. We don't spend it, so we get that extra 13 million cash flow to help offset the cost of the Children's Hospital. But at some stage, somewhere down the road, that 13 million physically has to be found for the Children's Hospital. And eventually, it has to be taken away from some programme, somewhere. And what are we faced next year in relation to the Children's Hospital? Because every year for the next number of years, each programme or each department is going to have to find a figure to help fund the Children's Hospital. And while you're just moving it this year into next year and keeping the envelope the same, at the end of the day, that 13 million has to be found, and whatever we're going to lose next year. Just more specifically in relation to heading A8, in the area of research, statistics and economics, there's an 81% increase for 2019. Maybe you could give us some indication of where you see that being spent. And under heading A21, infrastructure fund is receiving an additional 130 million. Maybe the Minister could kind of indicate where he sees that being spent. Just a few.
Thanks. What was the heading before that, Deputy?
Sorry,
A8?
A8. Sorry, A8. Research, statistics and economics, an 81% increase.
Capital loans. Okay, we'll get a note on that. Yeah, thanks. So in relation to the, sorry, did you have a question for Minister English first? Did you? Sorry,
It just followed on from.
Sorry.
Again, we expect that expert panel to report to us in April at the latest. As of last week, our engagement with them, I think they are on track to do that. In relation to the question of significant changes, I'm not going to try to guess what they're going to recommend to us. I think there's a commitment from all of us here to try to work with the suggestions they make, that we see can we implement them, because I think there is a desire for us all, but also I think it's necessary that we do our job here, which hasn't happened across the board in my local authorities. So the expert panel were clearly asked by all of us to come back, but whatever it takes to make the changes here, that we can increase the spend and the delivery of accommodation suitable for travellers. And we're prepared to work with that. I don't know what they're going to come back with. I do not know. I haven't given them any instructions. I haven't asked for instructions. But I think what I have made it clear to them is that we want changes that will make an impact immediately, not something that will happen down the line, because we do need to, and in the short term we are going to engage a lot more local authorities this year, and certainly the key area is to try to get the spend moving for this year. Even
I think we're all in agreement. It's just this frustration here to seeing the money being allocated and then we're increasing the allocation and it's just not being spent.
And again, when we increase that money, it's on the back of proposals put forward to us.
Yeah, I know.
And then the delivery doesn't happen. Now, it doesn't happen for a combination of reasons. It's not just...
I know.
There's different reasons there, but we have to work through them, and I'm hoping the expert panel will give us the evidence and the suggestions we need, and then we can talk it through here as a committee about how we implement those changes. But I get a sense there is a desire among all the different parties that we move this forward, so hopefully we can make inroads. But I think we want the money to be spent, and we can win increased resources when we get what we have spent, but it's very hard to increase the capital spend when it's not been spent, if you know what I mean.
Thanks.
You're on the research, because we couldn't find the subhead you were referring to, but basically on the research, we have a number of research projects happening at the moment from the department, always on an ongoing basis. We would have contracted with the ESRI to do 3 specific projects, which have been happening over the last number of years. They'll continue into this year as well. We've already produced, I think, 2 of the reports from memory. One was in relation to, you might remember, I think Michelle Norris was involved in it, in relation to social housing stock and the appropriate use of social housing stock. If memory serves, that was the right report. But we also have technical research always ongoing in relation to things like building standards, building controls, helping to produce different reports and go into the back of different reports that might get published from time to time. So the increased allocation for funding will be based, I don't think on the back of any new programmes that have been put in place, but just the fact that the level of funding has been delivered this year, because more is going to be expected from those existing programmes. And sorry, just one additional piece of research is the funding for the central IGEES unit of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. So you might remember we discussed reports that they had produced around value for money and things like that. So this is work that's always ongoing in the background, if you like. In relation to the 13 million, so from our point of view, from the Department of Housing's point of view, the money won't be drawn down this year. So we can allocate it out of the department into another department, which is what's happened. But because the budget for housing is ring-fenced, unlike other housing budgets, the 30 million will come back to us as new money next year. So we aren't just moving it into next year, we're actually going to get an additional 13 million next year, because the funding commitment for housing is ring-fenced. So that's where, if you like, the new money comes from. You're saying, where does you have to find the money sometime. Well, actually next year the 13 million will come back into the vote. So it won't diminish what we have under the regeneration fund. And in relation to the infrastructure funding and the increased allocation for 2019, that's because of the service sites fund comes in under the infrastructure fund subhead.
Okay.
Mick, have you any questions under programme A? No. Okay, we move on to programme B, which is water services. Have any questions there? No. Owen?
Yeah, just to follow up on the discussion we had with the EPA, Irish Water Department, in terms of additional funding for wastewater treatment upgrades. Just in terms of the vote, can you let us know, in terms of this year, what's expected in terms of the total spend on wastewater treatment as compared to last year? Because I know there is some additional money in there.
Okay, any questions under this heading? No.
With the chair. Thanks, Deputy. So on the overall capital, which is water and wastewater, will go from 500 to 646 million euro in 2019. And did you have a separate question underneath the capital spend?
Yeah, so within that, excuse me, there's capital investment in terms of upgrading drinking water, and there's capital investment in terms of upgrading the wastewater treatment plants. Now, I think from memory, last year the total spend on the upgrading of the plants and the distribution network for wastewater was somewhere in the region of 240 or 250 million. So I'm just wondering, of the increased overall capital expenditure for this year, is there an increased portion going into wastewater treatment? The reason I'm asking is not to be too technical, but just given the European Court of Justice judgment and obviously the work that the Department and Irish Water are trying to do to ensure we don't get fined, I'm just wondering what the increase is to meet those key commitments.
Thanks, Deputy. Yeah, I mean, like, the infringement case is an important one, and obviously we're in the middle of that at the moment. We have significant capital funding going into wastewater treatment facilities between now and 2021. I just don't have the breakdown in front of me as to what the spend is for 19, but I would imagine, because all heads are increasing essentially, or almost all heads, that there will be an increase for the wastewater treatment as well. And I know that this is important, not just because of an infringement case, but because how we treat our water. And, you know, we all saw recent images coming from the treatment plant in Poolbeg, and there is a commitment for, I think, an additional 400 million into that facility. It's very important that people understand that while these problems can't be sorted, you know, in the morning, by making these investments, we do improve water quality. And you'll remember from last year the number of water bodies that did improve in water quality as a result of investments that were made over a number of years. So we know that the money invested will produce the results, and the money has been allocated to do that, both under the capital plan to 2021, but also the additional resources that are allocated under the National Development Plan and Project Toronto 2040. Thanks.
Yeah, no, briefly, it's probably just to get a better understanding of how the process works, and maybe in what level of control you as Minister has as to where the capital funding is eventually invested into. And as Owen had said with Irish Water in here a couple of weeks ago, and I raised the issue of when Irish Water was established, it had this horizon window where the investment needed to be paid back within a 15 or a 20-year period, otherwise it wasn't really viable. And when you look across the country and you look down towards the smaller towns and the smaller villages, the capacity of repaying investment in that period is not feasible. So from 2 points of view: one, it doesn't hit Irish Water's radar because they don't see any return on the investment into it. And secondly, you know, in order to sustain rural Ireland and to keep our smaller rural towns and our smaller villages alive, we're already seeing significant decline in population numbers in villages because there's no wastewater capacity. And I could give you a number of villages in Wicklow where there's been no investment in water services for 20 years, and there's no capacity to allow them grow. So what I'm asking is, what influence do you have in relation to Irish Water and where the money is directed? In my engagement with Irish Water last week, they have said they're now going to local authorities and trying to get their top 3 priorities in relation to villages. But as you as Minister, can you direct them to ring fence a percentage of that capital investment into supporting our smaller rural towns and villages to help them sustain and indeed help us in relation to the housing crisis? Because he could build 20 or 30 houses in each small town or village tomorrow morning quite easily and would help. Just, maybe an update on that.
Thanks, Deputy. I mean, look, it's a very interesting question, because obviously I have a number of dealings with Irish Water on a number of different fronts. And we have the CRU as well that's watching everything that we do. And we have overall kind of arching policy frameworks that then have to be met with capital funding, which I've got to negotiate to get for the body each year, or on a multi-annual funded basis, depending on what programmes we're looking at. And then they go about spending that according to the policies that we put in place. So at a strategic level, I will say wastewater is a priority. And as a result, if you look at their spending between 2019 and 2024, I think about 6.1 billion will be spent, and 1 in 3 of those euros, roughly, will go on wastewater. But it's for them to then decide where the priorities are in wastewater, depending on their own assets that they have, but also engaging with local authorities as to what their priorities are. So I don't direct them in that regard. I direct them at the strategic level about the kind of the quantity of money that should be spent in this area and how important it is. But separate to that as well, though, because obviously if we're going to be building more houses and building communities, we have to make sure the infrastructure is in place. So there has to be alignment between what I'm trying to do as Minister for Housing and what I'm trying to do as Minister for Irish Water. And so we have put in place resources in both areas to make sure that, you know, one side of government's talking to the other, so that as we build more homes, the infrastructure has been put in place. It's been put in place with kind of joined up thinking in relation to the phasing. I'm trying to remember this now correctly, but roughly speaking, I think when I last spoke to Irish Water on the housing side of the brief, they spoke about something like a request in the pipeline for 130,000 new connections, something like that. And that tallies with something I heard from the Royal Association of Architects, which said that they had, across their professional firms in the country, you know, plans being worked on for about 130,000 homes. So this talks about the scale of what's actually in the system and being planned for at the moment in terms of new housing delivery that will then materialise over the coming years.
Yeah, I suppose it doesn't ask the specific question I asked was, can you ring-fence money that's spent specifically on wastewater facilities into our smaller rural towns and villages? Because Irish Water are not, in fairness, it's not that it's not their priority. They have a limited budget. They have bigger towns to look after. They have, you know, issues where they're non-compliant that have to be faced, and they're not getting down to, you know, the rural towns and the rural villages. And like, it's great getting the town and village renewal schemes. They're fantastic, public open space, brilliant. But we also need them villages to grow, and they can't grow unless the critical infrastructure of wastewater and water is there. And I'm just saying, it hasn't been highlighted enough, I think, in relation to how important it is that that critical infrastructure is reinvested into our smaller towns, our towns under 5,000 populations, and indeed down to our larger villages, because they have a role to play also in relation to the housing crisis. And it would be a lot easier, in some cases, get 20 houses in each village across the country. Yeah, no, I'm just...
It's clear. I mean, so the short answer is no. I mean, we have a water policy statement, and Irish Water have to spend their money in accordance with that statement, according to that statement of strategy. But separate to that, we are reviewing the needs in relation to rural water programmes and what's happening in relation to rural water. So as part of that, we are trying to see and anticipate where additional funding might be necessary, and then we can appropriate that for, say, group water schemes, if you like, doing it that way. If that's
but that's the group water.
Yeah,
this
but that's still rural Ireland, because you asked about
this
rural
is
Ireland.
Irish Water's own assets that I'm talking about that need to be upgraded.
Yeah.
Not the rural water
So
programme.
in relation to that, they have to do their works in line with the policy statement that I set for them, and the CRU oversees that they do that. So that's how that works at that level.
We can move on to Programme C under local government. Are there any questions under that? No. Great.
Where does the LPT come into it? Is this bit? When are we having the review of the LPT?
I can answer that question.
Yeah, just I'm not too sure whether it's this.
So, so there's two things happening with the LPT in relation to the reviews that are underway. One is a review that's happening in my own department, which concerns how we allocate money from the local property tax to local authorities. So people are familiar of the calculation of the baseline that we've been using from the 2014 position, and then how money moves in and out of the LPT, 80% retention, etc., and then reallocations and top-ups and everything else. The second piece of work in the review is being done between myself and the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, and it's about the amounts raised, how the LPT raises money and what amount it raises. Both pieces of work are ongoing. The side that's more specific to how we fund local authorities in terms of how the money is allocated is there or thereabouts complete. Minister Phelan's done a lot of work on this in relation to how you would weight the investment into each local authority depending on how much is raised in their own area. We call it shorthand bucket model. You'll understand it when you see it. I mean, but it's there's different kind of buckets that have different priorities depending on national policy. And I probably shouldn't say any more than that until we've actually published it. And then the second piece is being led by the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, and work on that is ongoing. Obviously, we understand because of the point we'll reach later in the year that work needs to conclude, but it is a priority for both departments.
You did mention the baseline review there, and that's, I suppose, critical for each local authority. A lot of them have been screaming for a review of that process, so that will be completed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the work that Minister Phelan's leading. It's essentially almost complete. We just haven't finalised it. And I think a commitment I gave previously, so I don't think I'm giving a new commitment, is that
I'm just...
No, but I think a commitment that I did give was that no local authority was going to lose money on foot of the review that we are doing. This is about allocating additional resources. So we recognise, and I recognise from the engagements that I've had with different local authorities, that some feel that the current model could be better designed to suit their particular needs as a local authority, which are different from other local authorities depending on the type of local authority they are, who lives there, population clusters, coastline areas, etc., etc. So all that kind of stuff has been accounted for in the review, and we just the second piece needs to finish, and then when we have that, we'll be able to make that public.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, members, I propose then we take programme D, E and F together. Is that agreed? That's what we normally do. So it's planning, Met Éireann and appropriations. Have any questions under that?
I'll give you the forecast, Chair, if you want.
In relation to planning, and in relation to the regional plans, I suppose they're coming online shortly. It's just, I suppose, the national planning framework and the regional plans, and then, the operating from top level down, is causing some problems locally, because what's happening now is that as a result of the regional plans, and I'm anticipating what's going to happen down the road, is the likes of my own county will have to do a complete review of their county development plan based on the regional ones. And there's a number of significant towns within that have their own local area plans. And one in particular has been rolled over twice. So it hasn't had a review of its county development plan now for nearly 12 years. And now, because the county development plan is going to have to be reviewed, that's 18 months. So you're looking at potentially another 2.5 to 3 years before that area has a new plan. And I think, and then equally with Wicklow and Rathnew and Vorn's plan, which is a huge area of growth, its plan, which was meant to be done this year, will now be kicked down the road for another 2 years. Is there no processes, especially the likes of Newtown, which hasn't had a review for nearly 14 years, could proceed with their review, or Wicklow and Rathnew? Do you know what I mean? Because they can't proceed. They're told legally they can't proceed now, because it has to run in line with the national planning framework, the regional plans, county plans, and everything has to be sequenced from the top down, And I could have an argument with Minister Phelan here in relation to the urban ones. They were actually going the opposite way. They were directing policy from the bottom up when it came before us. So maybe just if you could come and get some clarity.
The short
around
answer,
that.
Deputy, is no. There has to be coordination between all the plans and a consistent vision for the country, or else it's not going to work. And that's why it's important that we put the national planning framework on a statutory basis, so that all other plans must flow from it. And I know that means delays in some areas, but we are talking about the next 20 plus years for the country in terms of its development and getting it right and getting it coordinated. And that's why we have to have consistency amongst them. So, yeah, we're going through a period of transition, if you like, a little bit of period of disruption as we interpret the national planning framework into the 3 regions, and then from there into each of the county and city development plans. But the long-term benefit of that is joined up thinking. The long-term benefit of that is 75% growth outside of Dublin,
Yeah, I've no argument with the principle of what's being proposed. I'm just saying that some communities are being significantly affected by it now. The likes of Newtown and Kendy, which has shown huge growth, their plan is not fit for purpose for actually what's happening on the ground today. And the same in relation to Wicklow and Rathnew's plan. But Newtown is more significant because they haven't had a plan for 14 years.
I suppose, in fairness, the plan is practically, it should be finished by May. I know you're saying it'll take 2 or 3 years, but it doesn't have to take 2 or 3 years. They can begin the process of reviewing the Wicklow plan and all the towns and villages from the summer onwards.
Okay, so you're saying
the regional plan
you can review your county plan and review a local area plan within that plan at the same time?
They can get going on that, yeah, because that review can start now after. I mean, the regional plan should be finished in May, and the process can kick off then from there on. And it shouldn't take them 2 or 3 years. I mean, it's a matter of resource and how to prioritise. But you'll have your county plan without your overall ambition. But you could complete that process well in other timelines.
There's absolutely no point in proceeding with a plan that's going to then find itself not complying with the RSES, because then you just wasted everyone's time, because the RSES will trump that.
Except for the old urban plans, we're able to trump everything and go wrong.
Special powers, yeah.
Special power.
Well, I mean, the short answer is it's up to local authority now to get the resources in order, because it should be completed in May, the regional plan, so there'll be no...
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, and we know how long it takes a county plan, when even you go for a simple variation, never mind a full review of it, do you know what I mean? And then, theoretically, then you shouldn't start a local area plan up until that process has started. So, best will in the world, you're looking at 12 to 18 months for a county development plan. And then you're only starting the process for your local area plan. So that's another 12 to 18 months. So realistically, you are looking at potentially up to four.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. The timelines you've outlined doesn't have to be that long. But just the two positives are, I mean, as Eoin said, it realigns with the national planning.
I
framework.
can
And
understand
I think the
the
local authority are
principle.
quite. My understanding is through the process, Wicklow local authority are quite happy with how it's turned out, and it's a positive for the county, and we'll build on that. So I think it's yes, there's been time delayed in getting to this stage. In terms
We'll wait and
of
see about it.
Well, I understand their content, so we'll see what comes out of it. But and then you have your new local authority coming in June are set with the job. So the times actually add up quite well that the new local authority will have ownership of the new plan, and you're not caught in the middle of that. So I think that should be positive as well.
You might just give us an update on the establishment of the flood services, the establishment of the flood forecasting services.
Sorry. So this is a piece of work that's been done, obviously working with OPW as well. So I've been speaking to Minister Boxer-Moran about this just towards the end of last year. We are recruiting additional people at the moment. Let me just try and find the correct subhead. So in last year, Chair, we appointed the Chief Hydrometeorologist and commenced recruitment of specialist staff. And we've also progressed the implementation plan for establishing the Flood Forecasting Centre within Met We've also conducted a review and a trial of a range of hydrological models and integrator systems. We can discuss in more detail what they are if you'd like, but I don't know what they are. And then in 2019, we're going to continue to recruit specialist staff. We're going to have to select hydrological models and integrator systems for use in the operational fluvial flood forecasting, and then develop a communication strategy for the Flood Forecasting Centre in order to disseminate flood alerts in a timely and efficient manner. So obviously this falls to Met to do, and we're providing the funding, but we are coordinating the work with the OPW given the role that they play in flood defence.
Members, we're now going to move to consideration of vote 16, the Valuations Office. Have I any questions for the Minister? No? Right. So we'll move to vote to the consideration of vote 23, which is the Property Registration Authority. Have members any questions for the Minister? No? Okay. As we've now completed our consideration of the revised estimates for votes 16 and 23 and further revised estimates vote 34, the Clerk will send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Orders 90, under Standing Order 89. The message is deemed to be the report of the committee. Great. Okay, members, we're going to adjourn this meeting, but we can't start our joint committee until 10:30 because senators were told 10:30, so and we have to leave a 15-minute gap minimum in between each meeting. So we'll adjourn. This meeting is now adjourned sine die, and we'll recommence at 10:30 for Rebuilding Ireland update.